Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Today we're going to look at Lost Cities from prolific game designer Reiner Knizia. But first, Chit Chat.
In today's Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about creating decision points in games and game flow, the idea that games should have a beginning, middle, and an end. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Chit Chat. In today's Chit Chat, we're going to be taking a look at the mechanical aspects of gaming. We're going to be taking a look specifically today at the idea of creating decision points in games and game flow, the way games move through a beginning, middle, and an end. So I think we should start with creating decision points.
Okay.
What I mean when I say decision points are elements in the game that the players continually come up to a point where they have to make a decision. It's kind of self-explanatory. I'm thinking in this instance of things that are pervasive to the design. So not simply things that come up once in a while in a game where you have to make a big choice, but things where you're constantly having to evaluate. Maybe in Race for the Galaxy, for instance, the cards themselves are the payment for your other cards, but they can all be played individually. So every time you play something in Race, you have to evaluate in your hand what you're going to least need to be willing to, what you're most willing to lose, what you can least, do without. In Versus system, one of my favorite TCGs, every card can be played as a resource that generates resources for other cards. In addition, they can all be played for an effect. So same kind of situation.
Okay.
In Nexus Ops, you have the energy cards at the end. The energy cards you can sell in order to get the resources that you spend in that game. So it's the idea that you can use cards for two different purposes or use things in the game in two ways, and you're constantly having to look at them. Fleet Captains, a game we looked at recently, you can cycle every turn one mission card and one command card. That means that every turn you have to evaluate your hand, think about what you could least need, and potentially get rid of it.
The game we're going to review today, Lost Cities. You find decision points in there all the time on to whether you should play that doubler or keep searching, or if you want to prolong the game by drawing cards off the discard or off the draw pile. Lots of decision points in that game.
Yeah, I think Lost Cities is an amazing example. When we talk about it later, I want to talk about the idea that in Lost Cities, you have the low value cards, which you have to open with, but the high value cards, which are really the driving force of your strategy, have to come later.
Yeah.
So you're constantly deciding between playing a card now, risking your opponent getting a good card by discarding it, or holding on to it. So it's that kind of constant decision making. Something even like Galaxy Trucker, a light game, has the rule in it where you can reserve 2 tiles on your board. The idea that you don't have to slot everything in immediately, you can set things aside for yourself, and that means that every time you take a tile, not only do you have to think, okay, do I want this in my ship now? Do I want to attach this to something I have? But also, is this an important piece that I'm going to need soon? Or is it something that I'm willing to throw back in the junkyard and let other people have?
So all these things so far fall well into the strategy scale of our breakdown. The Galaxy Trucker example specifically, when you gave us the description at the beginning of our chit chat, you said things that are pervasive to the game. I think that 2 tiles with Galaxy Trucker, that's right on the edge of something you're only going to see like once in a game. Another example that I think is a big decision point, but it isn't pervasive to the game, is something that I brought up when we were talking about Last Night on Earth, sacrificing your heroes. Heroes are essentially a resource in that game, and if the specific scenario is complete a task or survive a length of time, sacrificing your heroes is a strategic decision that I think a lot of people ignore in that game. But I would say it's not pervasive to the game. It's not something that you're constantly considering. So I wouldn't really call it a decision point. So what do you think? Where's the line?
I might call that a decision point, actually, because sacrificing heroes is something you're evaluating constantly. I think when I'm thinking of decision points specifically in this context, I'm thinking of things that are mechanics, not individual card effects. So things that you're always thinking about whether or not to do.
Okay.
And I like, especially when they work elegantly into the design, when they're not a tack-on kind of thing, but when they feel like it's something that really fits well into the kind of framework of the game. In Last Night on Earth, I would say that does meet those kind of criteria, because you're constantly having to choose with your heroes how best to use them. There's a constant decision of, okay, do I want this person to be searching, or do I need this person to kind of tank the zombies, kind of draw their attention away from the rest of my party?
So even for mechanics that are less than pervasive, not quite as elegant for the design, those are still decision points. Like if you're on your last hit point or life point, whatever it's called, in Magic the Gathering, and you heal once, is that a decision point? Like, does it count, or does it only count if you win, or how does that work?
No, I mean, just the term decision point can be used. Yeah, certainly it would apply to almost everything you're doing. But I'm thinking of ways, I think, in designs that are going to facilitate, rather than luck driving the game, skill. So I think this decision points plays really strongly into the luck skill scale and into the strategy tactics scale. So on luck skill, if you have a game with a lot of decision points, you're upping the skill factor. A good example is, like I said, I love versus system, and I'm not a huge Magic the Gathering fan, and part of that is the mana system. The mana system is a perfect example of something that does not create a decision point at all.
No.
When you draw every turn, if you have a land, you're going to play it. If you have multiple lands, you have to choose between them, but you're pretty much, if you have a land, you play it. If you don't, you don't. There's not too much to think about with that.
Yeah, I would say there are decision points, but almost none of them involve your mana curve.
So, example of a way you could add decision points in that context is what Versus did. Same exact framework, but instead of using lands, which have no, land kind of cards, or have minimal effects, sometimes they do, they use plot twists, which have myriad effects, and you have to choose between them. You can also play your heroes as resources in a pinch. So you don't have to worry about that luck of missing your curve or the kind of mindlessness of just playing a land. So with Versus, there's a lot more to juggle there. And I think that's really what creating decision points is about. It's about having to juggle kind of several different compelling resources or several different compelling options.
I guess it's poignant to say, since we're talking about luck and skill, that a decision point, a decision that you make, the outcome of which is determined by luck, like a die roll or something, would not really be a decision point, would it?
Pursuing it would, certainly, if you're pursuing a die roll kind of thing. Like if you have the choice between making, a play that involves a skill check in Fleet Captains, or you have a play that doesn't, that's a decision point, even though the results will somewhat be dependent on the die roll. I think the point is that with creating decision points, you're adding more decision making to the game, and at the end of the day, the skill level of a game is going to be dependent on the number of decisions that led up to the outcome. I would say that's kind of a fast and loose definition of skill in game, but it kind of works. And so when you're adding decision points, at some point they had to add the rule in Galaxy Trucker that let you reserve tiles.
Sure.
I don't think that was probably inherent in generation 1 of that game. And adding it, I think, adds not a ton, but it adds another layer of strategy to that game, adds another layer of skill that it wouldn't have had otherwise.
So how does all this fit into the idea of game flow, beginning, middle, and end?
Sure. So kind of what made me think of these conceptually paired is with Magic, you have the mana system, which naturally leads to a build-up. So I kind of thought about when I was thinking about decision points, I was thinking about the mana system and those kinds of things. So for game flow, this is something we talked about with most prominently in Thunderstone. Game flow, the idea that, and this is true of, I think, of all games, not just Ameritrash games, that a satisfying game will have a beginning, middle, and end point to it. If it's a Ameritrash game, it'll tell a story that follows that structure. If it's a Euro game, it might just ramp up in such a way. So something like Galaxy Trucker, again, we keep coming back to it, but it, as you go through the second and then third rounds, your ships get bigger and the points get higher. So you're playing for more points. That kind of natural ramp up that kind of eases you into the game with the first round. If you screw up early, you're not completely out of it. That all leads back to that definition of a game is fun when everyone believes he has an equal or reasonable chance of winning. So the ramp up kind of builds into that too. Whereas if a game ramps up, those early mistakes might cost you in a high skill duel, but they're not going to necessarily throw you out of the game if the game has a nice kind of ramp up structure to it. That allows for comebacks. It allows you to stay in it, and it allows you to feel like you're telling a story.
Well, I don't know about story for our game today, but I do see a lot of beginning, middle, and end in Lost Cities. That's a good. There's a very early part where you're digging for the cards. You want those high number cards in your hand, so you know which ones to lead off with. And by the middle of the game, you're considering which card to discard, which card your opponent is looking for, and at the end of the game, you're either trying to close off your explorations quickly or prolong the game so that you can still do a little phase 1 stuff.
Yeah.
I don't do that though. I'm a better player than that.
Yeah, I mean, with game flow, you have that kind of often that last turn where everyone's just point grabbing, and it kind of is completely tactical. There's the idea that you've all led up to this final point. Now you're just kind of ending it as strong as you can.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else about game flow or decision points?
Nothing I can think of.
I think that about wraps it up. So now we're going to teach you how to play. Specifically, I'm going to teach you how to play Lost Cities. Now I'm going to teach you how to play Lost Cities. Lost Cities is a mathy dueling card game from Reiner Knizia. The goal of the game is to have the most points at the end of 3 rounds. Each round ends immediately as soon as the last card from the draw deck is drawn. To begin the game, you'll place the map board in the center between the 2 players, and then shuffle all the cards together to form the draw deck. Then, you'll randomly determine the starting player and deal each player 8 cards to form the starting hands. On your turn, you're going to do 2 things. First, you're going to play a card, then you're going to draw one to replenish it. When playing a card, you have 2 options. You can either play a card to one of your 5 expeditions, or you can discard one to one of the corresponding discard piles on the board. When playing a card, you must play a higher value card than any other cards in that expedition. So, for instance, if I already have the 4 blue card played on my blue expedition, then I cannot play the 3 blue card. I can only play up from there. So I can play the 5 or 6, but I can never go backward. In addition, if you'd like to play an investment card, you must do so in an expedition before you play any numbered cards. The expeditions will multiply the value of the expedition, either positive or negative, at the end. Instead of playing a card, you can choose to discard one to the center board. When discarding a card, you'll simply discard it onto the appropriate color in the middle. Then, after you've played a card, you may draw a card. In fact, you must draw a card, so you will always end your turn with an 8-card hand. When drawing a card, you can simply draw one off the top of the draw deck, or draw the top card off of any discard pile. You may not draw the card that you've discarded in the same turn. Thus, essentially, you cannot skip your turn. At the end of the round, when the last card is drawn, you'll tally your points. The points are scored thusly. Each expedition for which you have played no cards is simply 0 points. You do not score it either positively or negatively. For an expedition that you have placed at least 1 card, it can include just a backer, you'll score it in the following manner. First, you will take all the cards in the set and add them together. Then you will subtract 20 from that value. This number will be multiplied potentially by any investment cards you have. If you have no investment cards, it's multiplied by 1, but for every investment card you played, you increase that multiplier by 1. So if you have an investment card, you'll double your score. If you have 2 investment cards, you'll triple it, and 3, you'll quadruple it. Then, if any of your expeditions has at least 8 cards in it in total, you will add 20 points at the end. This 20-point bonus is never multiplied by a backer. Once you've tallied up your points for the round, then you're ready to begin the next round. In a round, the player who is currently leading will always begin. Now you know how to play Lost Cities. Now that you know how to play Lost Cities, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Because Mike and I agree about the game, we're going to roll to see who argues for it and who argues against. If it's even, I'll take the pros, and if it's odd, he will. Once again, Mike is going to argue for why games are awesome, particularly Lost Cities.
And Tom will tell you why he made this long trip out here just to complain about board games, apparently. To begin with, Tom, I would say that, Lost Cities, I would say that it really transcends its lack of theme. I would say that, though it is simply it's just a numbers and colors game. The theme is thin at best. Even that said, it feels like a dueling game. Mm-hmm. When I'm playing Lost Cities, I feel like I'm really getting in my opponent's head. When I'm discarding cards, I feel like I'm playing defense. I feel like I want to make sure I discard cards that he won't be able to use against me. That's kind of the defensive aspect of the fight. When I'm playing cards to my own side, I feel like that's my offense. The drawing cards from either the center of the table or from the deck. It just feels like there's a lot of back and forth. And because this is kind of a zero-sum game, because every card my opponent has is a card that I'm definitely not going to see. There's only one copy of everything. There's a strong sense of give and take with it. There's a real kind of back and forth. And like I said, it just makes me feel like I'm in this intense kind of mental battle of wits, a duel with my opponent.
Yeah, it's interesting that the most compelling thing about this game, the dueling aspect, has almost nothing to do with the theme. And I think that's pretty rare for a game. It's too bad that I hate all games in general.
Apparently.
Usually because math is involved.
So says that I.
Math is a problem in this one. Now, I generally don't have a problem with math, but with this particular game, it's just annoying to add up all that crap at the end, to remember you've got to break 20 before you can multiply positive, and if you don't break 20, you have to multiply negative. You have to remember there's an 8-card bonus. There's just a lot of math involved with doing the game, and that's really kind of annoying. I don't think there's a solution to it. It's there, and it's annoying.
Yeah, I agree. I too hate math, and for an otherwise very fast game, the arithmetic that you have to do every round really slows it down.
Like we sometimes say with games that have a long setup compared to the gameplay, this one has a long end game, scoring game.
Long tabulation. I completely agree with that. But that's, that being the case, I still feel like this one has a very elegant design. It's a shame you have to do the math, but everything holds together with this game so well. You have so many, we talked earlier about in the chit chat today, about decision points and how to add decision points to your game. This one, every play is a big decision point. It's totally pervasive with this one. Every time you go to play a card, you're constantly asking yourself, okay, do I want to play this now or later? I can play it now, and I can maybe lock myself out of some numbers and just run the risk that if I draw a card, I'm just hoping it's not one of the ones I just skipped. For instance, if I play a green 6, I lock myself out of the 5 and 4 if I just played the 3 previously. Sure. So, if I then draw the 4, well, I'm kicking myself. So it's kind of crunching the numbers, thinking about what your odds are of drawing the one thing you're going to think about skipping, versus risking giving something to your opponent. You're always weighing that back and forth. You're always saying, well, how much do I want to potentially limit my own offensive options in order to play a more conservative game, in order to offer my opponent less in terms of, giving him things to throw in his tableau. So there's that constant decision making, which I really love. You have the kind of meta strategy in this one of, because it's 3 rounds, you can agree to a different number of rounds, but I like 3. Because it's 3 rounds, if you are leading by, say, 30 points going to round 3, that can really inform your play. You can say, well, I don't need to go crazy here. I just need to prevent my opponent from having a good run. I don't need to get a ton of points. I just need to make sure he doesn't get a ton.
You mentioned 3 rounds, and it's not a con, but I would like to say that I wish that more attention was given in the rulebook to playing over multiple rounds. Because when I originally learned this game, we only ever played just one game.
Really? To
decide the winner. And after relearning the game to do for this show, playing it for three rounds in a set, it makes it really feel more competitive, more.
Yeah, it adds a little bit of skill too.
So the level of aggression that you mentioned and the mentality behind those plays really helps the game, I think.
Yeah.
It's a little unfortunate that we have some unintuitive aspects to the game. So I mentioned previously the math at the end of the round. Well, the way the game ends is when the last card is drawn. I can't tell you how many times I've drawn, or the opponent has drawn that last card. I'm like, I just want one more card. Just that one more card. Yeah. And even in thinking about it, like, you'll count the cards left in the deck and you'll think, all right, if there's 7 cards, that means I'm going to get 4 turns, or is it 3, 4, whatever. You finally figure out how many you're going to get, and then you just you screw it up. You don't play that last card, or you play it too early, whatever. And
that can change based on how you draw from the deck cards too.
Sure, you can
which
extend
does
the game.
Feed into the elegant design that I mentioned. You have that kind of also decision making and how to lengthen or not. But yeah, I do agree. It's unintuitive.
The other unintuitive aspect is the cost of investment to get into an exploration in the first place. Once you pick it up, once you learn this aspect, it's not hard to get beyond. But first-time players, I've never seen a first-time player of this game play their first game and remember that they have to beat a score of 20 before they're scoring positive points. Yeah. Every time. So it's just a little too far on the unintuitive scale to make it good.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even though this is kind of the opposite of space captain or fleet captains.
Yeah.
Where fleet captains has a lot of rules, but they're really intuitive.
Yep.
When you hear them, they instantly click. They even hero click.
Oh, good.
But with this one, it's the opposite. There's a few rules. They're very simple, but they're a little unintuitive. So I will agree. I'll give you that one. But Tom, I've heard that you played this game every day for 2 years.
You
so
are
obviously
greatly over-exaggerating.
I mean, that's what I heard. That's all I'm saying. You played this every day for 2 years, which gives this game insane replayability. 700 games of Lost Cities, folks. This guy played.
Yeah.
So, but in all seriousness, I do feel like this one's very replayable. Even though it's very complete, there's an expansion would be ludicrous. I don't get tired of this one very easily. I always feel like I can pick it up and play it with somebody, and it'll be kind of fresh in some way. It's like Race a little bit in that you're constantly, because there's that constant decision making, you always feel like you can improve your play.
Yep.
You always feel like you could do something a little better. And really that kind of, the idea of juggling things and having to decide what you're giving up the least, kind of like what you can most afford to lose, is kind of, I think, indicative of a Reiner Knizia game. I feel like that's the kind of decision I'm always making in his games is, what can I afford to lose here? Because you're always giving something up. You can never do it all. You're always a little bit shy. You don't have quite enough actions or quite enough resources to do everything you want to do. Mm-hmm. And that critical decision of what to give up.
That is most definitely a hallmark of his games.
And that gives his games, and this one in particular, great replayability.
First, let me comment on the replayability. I wouldn't say it's quite 700 games, maybe somewhere in the 600 range. But we did play it wrong all those years ago. It was the early aughts, and I guess we weren't too into reading rule books or something. I'm not sure. We used the backer cards multiplier incorrectly, but we used them incorrectly consistently. So I don't know if it changed the game too much.
So that was an inadvertent house rule, to get back to our house rule chit-chat. Is it one you'd keep?
No, I don't think I would. It just adds a level of snowballing, maybe.
Swinginess.
Swinginess. Allows you to pull away faster. It's not necessary.
I would be surprised if in a Reiner Knizia game, in general, we would find a house rule helpful. The one I guess I do have with this one, actually, is that in the rule book, it says that you are not supposed to look at cards underneath other cards in the discard pile. I abolished that a while ago. I don't feel like we need to add a layer of memory to this game.
If that was a rule, I never followed that.
So yeah, that one I can see. But in general, his games, because they're so mathy, because they're so well designed from that perspective, it'd be hard to house rule them.
So the other thing I want to say about replayability, I did play this many years ago, played it a lot, and then in relearning it for this shoot, it was a burden. Sure, there's lots of replayability, but I really felt like I had to climb that mountain again just to remember how everything interacted. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe because I had done it so much the first time I was burned out on it. But I can't deny a lot of replayability. The last negative thing I have to say about it is going to be that it's marginally overproduced. The cards are bigger than they need to be. The board is superfluous. It's just you don't need this much stuff. You could fit it in a totally small box.
Show the box, yeah.
You could fit it in a box easily a quarter this size if you had small cards, and you could bring it anywhere. It would be a great game to play libraries and coffee shops and things if it weren't for the board. You could conceivably still, but it's just a little bigger than I like for that kind of game.
Yeah, it is a little overproduced. The board is nice. It's got this kind of like wood grain paint on it.
Yeah, I don't have any complaints about the stuff themselves.
But yeah, I do agree. You don't really need it. And after you've played it a little while, you'll get tired of the board and the size of the cards. But on the whole, Tom, what do you think of it? We can pull ourselves out of the point-counterpoint system now.
Well,
what do you think?
I do love this game. I did play it a lot back in the day. There are two things that I absolutely love. The first is the art, how all the images build into the next. So you could start all the way down at 2 and build up, and you're headed toward the end goal that you see at 10, and that you see that same image on the backer cards. That's really cool. It's a really minor theming element, but I love it. The other thing, I did play it a lot back in the day. We loved it because it was, like you said, a dueling game that really had nothing to do with the theme, but it was really compelling in that way. It was easily the best two-player game I've ever played, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow. That's high praise. I also really enjoyed this one. I agree with everything you said about that. The art is kind of nice that it's panoramic. This one, I just really like the way it all plays together. I love the way that you can the decision points. It comes back to our chit chat. Constantly having to think of, okay, what do I give up? How do I, do I lengthen the game? Do I slow down the game? How many turns do I have? How can I maximize this? There's just a lot to it. There's a lot in that little box. And I'm kind of wavering between a 7 and an 8 up for this one because I am an Ameritrash gamer at heart, and this one doesn't have much of a theme, so it's not one of my absolute favorite games, but it works great as a 2-player. I'm going to give it an 8.
All right, get ready for the breakdown of Lost Cities. This is the breakdown of Lost Cities from Reiner Knizia. You can play a full 3-round game in 30 to 45 minutes, so we give it 90 short and 10 long. It's also a very fast game. We give it 90 fast and 10 slow. The turns are really short and you are always engaged on your opponent's turn. We give it 15 luck because the random deck can potentially sway a match, but it's mostly skill at 85. Lost Cities requires both strategy and tactics, but many of your tactical decisions will be weighed against future outcomes, so we give it 40 tactics and 60 strategy. On the surface, it might seem like Lost Cities is a solitaire game, but because of the dueling nature of playing cards versus holding cards versus when to discard cards, and the fact that it's a zero-sum game, that every card your opponent plays is a factor you have to consider, we give it 90 interaction and 10 independence. There's a bit of theme in the card art, especially with how the backer cards show the expedition's goal, so we give it 10 immersion and 90 abstraction. We give it 90 simplicity. It's so easy to learn and play. We give it 10 complexity, mostly because of the unintuitive nature in the rules surrounding investing in an expedition and when the game ends. We give it 85 portability and 15 grandeur. It's a very small game. It's highly portable. It does have a superfluous game board with it. We give it a perfect 100 in completeness. There's no reasonable way to expand this game. For our trophy scales, we give it 3 trophies in originality because it's a fun dueling math game that's kind of unique. We give value 3 trophies. It's easily affordable and the components are just fine. Mike gives it an 8 out of 10, Tom gives it a 9 out of 10, and that is the breakdown of Lost Cities.
We hope you enjoyed going on an expedition with us today in Lost Cities. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about elegant design. And we're going to be playing Bonanza, the crazy bean trading game.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates. See the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages. And leave us a comment with your favorite decision points in your favorite game.
See you next week.
It's hard to treat this game like solitaire because of the dueling nature of playing cards versus discarding cards versus holding cards, so we give it 10 interaction and 90 independence.
Other way around.
What do you mean? Oh, whoops.
Also,